So around 6 months ago, I was invited to give a talk on archaeology in science fiction. I was more than happy to do so, but unfortunately their email doesn't work, so I guess I'll just turn it into a video for my channel. As some of you might know, I did an archaeological dig in northern Greece. Where I was digging and who I was digging up. In the year of our Lord 2019, on the planet of Earth, these people were not as technologically advanced as the civilization that I am a part of. Growing up when I did, at the highest point of technological advancement our world and our civilization has ever seen, I had this view of technology and history as an inevitable progress. But ultimately my younger self was wrong. Humans can, in fact, lose technology. Humans can, in fact, lose knowledge. Just as we ourselves forget, so too do our civilizations. For example, those people in the Dark Age of Europe who knew enough about history to know of the existence of the Roman Empire would have certainly felt like humanity had lost, had regressed into a much more, how they would probably say, primitive state. Those people living in the Dark Ages would not have shared my linear view of technology and history, because for them, the past was a glorious place of technological advancement, and their present was the primitive Stone Age that they had been sent back to. Me, the modern man, digging in northern Greece, I am not likely to dig up anything more technologically advanced than anything my civilization can already make. I am not likely to find the ancient Macedonian ray gun or the ancient Phoenician antimatter reactor. King Ecbert from Vikings gives a good example of the opposite of what I experience. In the show, there's a scene where he expresses an immense curiosity about the ancient civilization that decorated the place he now calls home. For him, that great ancient civilization was the Roman Empire, to which he looked upon it as a source of lost knowledge that can be regained to somehow take some of the success that was granted to Rome. Now, where I'm talking about technology, the character in the show was more fascinated by their gods, thinking that was the Roman source of success. To bring it back to the original objective, I would say that archaeology in science fiction stands to be much more interesting, where I can only dig up things from a civilization less technologically advanced than our own. In science fiction, we can dig up things from civilizations way beyond us. In fact, it could be a source of advancement. Turning archaeology into the usual things that interest me, like learning about different cultures, but also turning it into a way to advance our species. The idea of long gone, ancient, advanced civilizations is obviously very common to science fiction. Stargate, Battlestar Galactica, The Expanse, Altered Carbon, even Star Trek to a degree all have this concept. Obviously, the expansiveness of the universe and her unbelievable age leaves a huge possibility for ancient hyper-advanced civilizations to come and go, leaving all their hyper-advanced technologies for us humans to find. I find the concept of the ancient hyper-advanced civilization that has come and gone particularly fascinating when that civilization is here on Earth, before our own. Why? Because secretly deep down I wish my history-bound field could maybe be something cool and science fiction-y. But importantly, it's a useful concept for breaking up the illusion that my younger self had, where I believe that technology inevitably progressed and never regressed. But also importantly, that maybe it helps break up the concept that culture progresses linearly. Where technology might regress, but also progress, culture does no such thing. Culture simply changes from one thing into another thing. Ultimately, I find sci-fi exceptionally useful for dealing with these kinds of issues because of the inherent spirit in the genre. At the heart of sci-fi is the desire to theorize, contemplate, and postulate. To contemplate and question our assumptions, and to theorize our minds and existence without them. But there is one thing that science fiction is not so great at depicting, and that is how much of archaeology is just thinking about how things break, fall apart, rot, and fade. So one simple principle to keep in mind is the farther down you go, the further back in time you are observing. Now, where I was digging, someone had dug before me, and they dug some layer that not necessarily above my head, but was above what I was digging. And the layer I was digging was something you call a destruction layer. And it's a layer where, as the name suggests, we find the remains of part of the house. And while digging this layer, we have to understand that when a house falls apart, the roof caves in first. So that's the earliest event. Then the next event is the walls coming down on top of that roof. But of course, in the grand scale of history, the destruction of a house more or less happens all at the same time. It might take 10 years, but in over a 1,000-year period, it doesn't really matter. And with that destruction layer, we have a mark. We have a place where we can tell where the inhabitant previously ceased to inhabit and where the next inhabitant began. And of course, the challenge of finding out what different buildings and houses were used for is similarly difficult. If we're lucky, whatever they did leaves lots of evidence, like a smithy or a ceramic workshop. But unfortunately, lots of industries surround something that is perishable, that fades, that disappears or rots. And the science of how things break apart and rot always needs to be kept close in mind, because it's very easy for us to see what there is and assume something, but forget that there is something that we are not seeing. A ceramic workshop will likely have lots of ceramics, but things that will also have lots of ceramics is perhaps a perfume workshop. But a perfume workshop is not a ceramics workshop, and the perfume is not going to stick around to tell you what it was. On this front, I am inclined to give science fiction a bit of a free pass, just because they often establish some kind of material that the ancient civilization builds its things out of. So, it kind of circumvents the whole issue of time is an inevitable, eroding, destructive force. A good example is maybe the ancients from Stargate, who built their little gate network out of a material called naquita, which not only does not succumb to the erosions and destructions of time, but also gains energy from its destructive forces. And I'm sure the Forerunners from Halo also have some sort of material that built their fancy structures out of for human rediscovery. Another reason maybe to be an archaeologist in a science fiction setting, since it's basically archaeology on easy mode. You don't have to think about how things fall apart because, well, they basically don't. Another thing that the science fiction often misses is just how much garbage you find in archaeology. I'll take a wager and say maybe 40% of everything that I found was the remains of some poor guy's roof. And I'll say the next 30% was broken ceramics and other things that he probably kept boring old items inside of. The next 15% was things he ate on a daily basis. So I found lots of bones from what I imagine was probably a chicken. I found lots of shells from oysters and clams. The remains of a meal that had not been shared in over 2,000 years. Now, I will say, it's probably not standard human behavior to just leave food waste in the middle of your house. So I'll give the science fiction a pass on that. But in terms of garbage, the more advanced the civilization is doesn't make it have less garbage, it just makes that garbage more fancy. Take my house, for example. Say my civilization and all her people are vanished in the blink of an eye. The person who discovers my house will find lots of containers, like the ceramics that I found in Greece, which were for a similar purpose of containing food and other important things. They will find the other not so glamorous parts of my house, like tables, chairs, long dead electronics, like the one you're watching me from. And of course, my house will have collapsed long ago, so all these random daily house items will be extra junk looking. And I really must fault a lot of science fiction for this, because often that garbage is really what is most important for learning about a civilization. There are great works of engineering, there are great works of science, there are great works of art. These are only things that represent the ideals of their society. At best, it shows us the lifestyle of the top echelons of society, but obviously most of any civilization is going to be regular people leading regular lives. What did these people eat? Where did they live? What did they wear? How did they pass their days? All these things are communicated to us through garbage. And as I said, the more advanced the civilization is, That just makes the garbage more fancy. And from that knowledge, we can learn about the true reality of a civilization. In fact, all anyone ever seems to find in science fiction is superweapons, megastructures, warships, and so many research facilities. Structures and objects that are not likely to represent the experience of most people in a civilization, maybe with the exception of the megastructure. From the information I get from these structures, all I can gather is that this entire civilization is comprised of soldiers, engineers, and scientists leaving their gigantic weapons and toys everywhere in the universe. Though I might criticize these works of fiction, I ultimately love them. While they might not be the most honest depictions of archaeology, they are excellent works of narrative world building. And I find the interrogating nature that stands at the heart of science fiction is necessary and important for challenging the assumptions that archaeology faces every day.